right, we're going to get started. I always feel like I'm louder than I am, but this is what they need to hear. This is what they need to hear. We have our guest on the big screen, which is perfect. Yes. All right, we're back. Thinking Link, it's Thursday. This is an event we put on every Thursday, third Thursday of the month, now in the evening. And it's sponsored by Capsule, and we're hosted in this amazing space by RSP Architects. I was going to get into this whole thing about design. I've been thinking about this lately about how the fact that everyone loves good design. They may not be able to articulate it or know when they've seen it or interacted with it. And sometimes it's just invisible, but everyone, doesn't matter who you are. And it automatically or seems to be a big spark for creating fanatical fans, right? The people and brands that use really good design often have fanatical fans. You see this in car brands like Saab, right? You see this in Apple as the classic example. And you see this in this space. This space was meant to have you in it, right? It was designed for this type of event. And it feels perfect, doesn't it? Anyway, so it was redesigned to make design. But yes, it was originally designed for beer. You can almost smell the hop some days. Anyway, the primary sponsor is Capsule, which is a special projects firm, our firm here in Minneapolis, up on the 4th floor, and special projects in the areas of marketing, brand, and design. And if you need to know more, go to capsule.us and to our Thinking Link to see the future events. Pretty amazing things. And I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Kitty, who's going to cover her background.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kitty Hart. I spent 10 amazing years at Capsule, and thank you always for inviting me to come back and co-host. So I am the Vice President of Brand Experience at Heroic Productions. So we do big corporate events, in-person, virtual, and hybrid. So as people, as companies and organizations need to bring people together, we do the stage production, audio, video, etc. So thank you again for asking me to co-host. I'm going to kick us off as we introduce our guests today. This is, Erin, you do a great job of putting amazing pairings together. So we're pleased to bring together Angela and Karen today for a really fun conversation. So we'll start with you, Angela, since you're sitting right here. You spent 20 years at Sleep Number, sitting in key roles from Senior Director to VP of Brand Experience to VP Connected Brand Experience. You were instrumental in repositioning Sleep Number into the tech leader and the wellness leader that it is today. You have been recognized as one of the top women in retail, top women in business disruption and innovation, retail innovator, love these words, a design influencer from Design Retail Magazine. So Angela, welcome. And if you wouldn't mind, please tell us just a little bit about what you're doing today.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. Usually I would introduce myself as, hi, my name's Angela Gearhart. My Sleep Number setting is a 35. But I have recently actually left Sleep Number early in the year and are focusing on something that I'm sure everyone in this room will do at some point, which is transitioning my parents to assisted living. At the same time, focusing on consulting, as well as I'm on a couple of different advisory boards, and started a little pet startup a couple of years ago, which we'll talk about later. So thank you. Thank you both for the invitation.
Wonderful. Great. And Karen, who we have on the big screen, welcome. Karen Schnelwar, you describe yourself as a brand strategist by trade. You have worked with brands both in-house and on the agency side, crafting brand strategies, identities, brand activations through content and campaigns. You have shaped an impressive list of notable brands. It was a long list, so I cherry picked a few. Okay, so I'm just gonna cherry pick a few of my faves. So T Swift is on her list. So for those of you who might be a Taylor Swift fan, we're excited to hear a little bit about that. Wolfgang Puck, Gap, Gymboree, Disney, Target, brands across the Nestle, Pepsi, and General Mills portfolios. So how fun. Welcome, Karen. Please tell us a little bit about what you're doing today.
Hi, and thank you. It's great to be here. I just want to say that I am the only New Yorker on the panel, and I'm the only one not wearing black. I just wanted to make a note of that because it struck me as kind of funny. Can you guys hear me?
We need a little bit more audio.
Oh, okay.
Are we okay? Go ahead, Karen.
Great. Can you hear me now? Yes?
Okay. Okay.
Terrific. Thanks. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that kind introduction. Yeah, well, so you did such a nice job summarizing things, Kitty, at a high level. I spent many years in the agency world and then had a very serendipitous pivot to client side and leading in-house brand and marketing teams. That's what I've done the last many years. And in the last couple of months, I've done something uncharacteristically trendy. I am doing fractional CMO work. That's like the buzzword these days. And working with a couple of different brands, but primarily with an interesting, it's funny that Kitty and I are both touching, I'm sorry, that Angela and I are both touching the pet world right now. I'm working as fractional CMO with a startup brand headquartered in Boston, but they're about to franchise. It's called Oniva, and it's high-end pet spas. It's like a dry bar for dogs. So it's been really fun to take all those years of working on brands and pouring it into such an interesting category, which, as Angela said, we'll talk about in more detail in just a few minutes. So that's my main focus right now. But there are a couple of other things in my orbit, and it's really fun to be thinking about multiple brands at once. And yes, I am a brand strategist by trade, but it's nice to have that kind of at my professional core. But I'm highly biased. I feel like having brand at the helm of leading cross-functional marketing is like a really nice way to empower everyone as like frontline brand stewards as they bring their own expertise to the table in various channels.
That was great. I love the pet concept. That was funny. I have images of pets going to blown out. That's a good image.
We do love our pets.
I know, we do.
So we stumbled upon
Sometimes
this.
more than the rest of our family.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
We stumbled upon this when we were doing our prep call before today. We had no idea that the two of you were both working on some pet products. So yeah, we will talk a little bit more about that.
Yes. And I do agree that some words get out buzzy, and we use words like disruption, and they get used and overused and abused. I don't think brand is ever a buzzword, though. It's kind of a fundamental. It's everywhere. It's got to be. But disruption, let's talk about that as something that's been part of each of what you've done, you've touched on. How has that changed lately? How has that evolved over time as you've thought about the brands you're working on and how they're disrupting existing categories? You want to start?
Sure. I think disruption is interesting because you can have disruption in many different ways. You can have disruption from a product perspective, from a process, from a customer. Anywhere that you can be able to drive growth in a new way can be a disruption. So I'll give you a couple examples from Sleep Number for disruption, and then another example in a very similar, well, in the same industry, but in a different way. And so disruption needs to be about something that's sustainable. I was able to work with Sleep Number through 3 major transformations. You may have remembered Sleep Number as seen on TV, Lindsay Wagner, anyone from that era here? Yeah. So the first disruption was really looking at the mattress industry in a different way, both from a product perspective, from a brand perspective, and from an experience perspective. The mattress industry, and actually shopping in that way, most people would rather go to the dentist than go mattress shopping. And so trying to change that paradigm and disrupting. That was one in the first kind of growth spurt. The second one was then looking at the product itself and disrupting and being a smart product. So a smart product that really delivered a unique benefit. So that was a propulsion from a growth perspective. And that was, both from a growth and then from a technology. And then the third was repositioning as a leader in health and wellness. So having a product that really can be the center of your health and wellness through the data that is provided, being able to connect that to your physician, being able to have a product that can even predict cardiac events. And so it becomes a whole different paradigm about how you think about sleep. So those are both, disruptions from a product and then how you meet the market. There's another company, which I won't name, but they're bed and box. So if you think about the other end of the disruption from the mattress industry was hundreds of companies that were disrupting on process and experience. How do you make it simple? How do you make it easier for the consumer? But the problem is that kind of disruption is not sustainable. So you're then, once you're innovating on process, then you only have price. And then you become in a price war where it's not sustainability from a profitability perspective. So looking at disruption in a way that both promotes growth and is sustainable for profitability is really where disruption is meaningful.
So not just disruption for the sake of disruption, which that would be an abuse of the word, right? How about Karen? What do you think?
Yeah, I love what Angela just ended on, and I'll pick it up right from there, which is disruption for disruption's sake is not enough. Before everyone became a disruptor, just having a really different point of difference or way of being in the world was enough, sort of existing and communicating it. I think that these days, almost every brand that launches needs to have obviously a competitive edge, but really something disruptive about it, whether or not that buzzword is used. But it isn't like it's getting crowded, it's getting crowded and you can't just shout it. You can't just have sharp elbows. I think the key is understanding why you exist and being really crisp in communicating it, making it part of your strategic core and making it very clear to key audiences and then continuing to deliver on it, because you can't just be a one shot deal. And I'm going to mention a brand that I've never worked with and I respect them, but when you think about like EOS and that round lip balm, that was like, oh my God. That became like a cultural moment. It was in like Miley Cyrus videos. Everyone had it in their bag. And I'd say arguably they've never really replicated that. They've never innovated on an ongoing basis enough to make that the core of who they are. So it was this great product, but I'd say it wasn't baked up from the outside in, wasn't baked in enough to who they were as a brand to be able to be the jumping off point for sustained innovation that continued to disrupt. And then the other thing that's interesting is, disruptor brands, challenger brands, if they succeed, they actually become the paradigm, which doesn't mean you have to keep blowing things up, but it does mean that you should never rest on your laurels. The worst thing a disruptor brand could become is complacent, because then they stop being themselves and they start getting stale and run the risk of other brands outpacing them. So it's an ongoing commitment to existing for a reason that changes the game for better.
Yeah, fascinating, especially during or before the pandemic, there was this Lime scooter that was going to disrupt Uber, which was like the disruptor gets disrupted. It was also fascinating what you're talking about there. They have to continue to do that and not just sit and relax on their laurels. Back to you, Kitty.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about, and it was probably Steve Jobs who said this, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but he was one who said, give people what they don't know they need yet, right? Was that his line? And it seems like the most disruptive brands are the ones who've been able to do that. They've been able to be way out in front of designing these things that they then make available to people. And people are like, I didn't even know I needed this, and now I'm absolutely in love. So you can't just necessarily set out to disrupt. You have to have an idea, right? It's just like you can't say, okay, I'm going to put out a post to go viral. Well, that never works, right? Okay, so what advice would you give to brands and to companies and how they go through the ideation process, how they go through the design process to come out the other side with something truly disruptive? Where do you begin? Because it's certainly a big undertaking. It's a big task.
Yeah,
Can-
I
can
would, really build on what Karen was saying, is that it has to clearly solve a problem. And if you're not solving a problem in a new way, in a way that's sustainable, then your disruption doesn't do anything. And so being not only a problem solver, but looking at where is your strength in your core? How do you leverage your core, which was where you can, really tap into that things that you really know. And then where are those adjacencies from core businesses and others that you can tap into those strengths to be able to disrupt in a different way. But as Karen was saying, is that it has to do something. And if it doesn't, then it's disruption for disruption's sake, which is just noisy.
I of course agree with that, and I'd love to share a thought. And this is where your introduction of me as a brand strategist by trade, just as the caveat I'll give, because I see everything through that lens first. I think it needs to be baked into the core definition of what the brand is and why you exist and how you see the world, which isn't to say we're disruptors. It's to say we want to make X, Y, and Z, we want to revolutionize X, Y, and Z, and then you're committed to doing that ongoing. It's baked into your core, and then that core expression becomes a jumping off point for ideation as well as a filter for evaluation. So I think that if you set a high bar and you have products or services or experiences that truly deliver on something that challenges the status quo and elevates it, actually capturing that that's part of why you exist in the space that you exist, and then having that high standard for everything you do, those ideation sessions, those innovation sessions become really focused and productive, and you filter out ideas that are just ho-hum, and you raise the bar and challenge people to to really keep bringing it. I'm also a really big fan when it comes to ideation of like empowering the frontline brand stewards, but also a healthy bit of cross-pollination, which isn't just cross-functional ideation within an organization, but also bringing in really fantastic outliers from completely different industries, from adjacent industries, people who might not even ever touch innovation. Their perspective might really just be the unlock to everything. So similarly to the way consultants have fresh eyes on a situation, and that could be illuminating, individual contributors from lots of adjacent or even random wildcard industries in the mix at a well-facilitated ideation session can be kind of magical.
Okay, we're going to do a little shift to sustainability and that concept of responsible brands and what you're doing and how that has folded into business strategy and is showing up everywhere and as it should be. Give me your perspective on that, Karen. And how has that played a role in the brands you've been involved with, and how you've avoided this, fake sustainability or greenwashing, as some call it?
Yes, greenwashing, virtue signaling, all these terrible terms that unfortunately are justified for places that just bolt something on thoughtlessly and just try to tick a box. So that's one thing about 2023 and beyond. Consumers are savvy, even the youngest consumers are the savviest. Transparency is mandatory because pretty much anyone can learn anything about you. So you might as well let sunlight in at all levels. And that includes how and where you give and you give back. So places that are just, yeah, we'll throw some money this way, so throw some money that way, try to get some credit for it. It's always interesting to see what brands do around Earth Day. That's like a big moment, and as it should be. But the brands that really live and breathe that versus the brands that are just ticking a box are completely obvious to a slightly trained eye. But it's so important and it's so wonderful. And so one thing I'd love to talk about is that I ran brand and marketing globally at the consumer products brand OXO for many years. I left just shy of 2 years ago, but spent between 4 and 5 years there doing that role, actually pioneering that role. And over my time there, one of the proudest things that I've been part of in my career was getting OXO affiliated with 1% for the Planet. So like really being part of the team that drove that communication. I'm sure everyone has heard of 1% for the Planet, but when you actually work with them, you'll fall in love with them even more. I mean, aside from just doing good at every turn, they really thoughtfully pair you with their thousands of nonprofit organizations, and you can really customize your giving in a very thoughtful way. So not only is it commitment to give 1% back. It is a way to really partner with organizations that subscribe to not just your values on sustainability, but the space that you live in. So OXO is primarily known for kitchen and culinary, and so there were a lot of food related organizations, agriculture related organizations, and we could not only give them dollars, but also, things in kind to help them move forward. Jose Andres, his organization. So I think that it starts from caring at your core and baking it into who you are strategically and emotionally, and then figuring out how to bring that to life in a way that never is as a braggart and never is just like waving a badge, but actually in a meaningful way so that consumers know what your values are on this front. And when they decide to engage with your brand, they can feel even better about it because they know their dollars are giving back as well. Oniva, who I'm working with now, is working with an organization, they're getting pets cleaning rooms, and they're working with an organization that actually provides mobile showers for homeless individuals in a given geography. And so that was from day one, a really important initiative. And it does pay off on what that brand does at its core as well. So I think it needs to be heartfelt, organic, baked in as early as possible. And OXO was almost 30 years before the 1% for the Planet Partnership. And it's fine. It's never too late to start, but it needs to be done in a way that feels really true to who the brand is, and that commitment is sustained.
Yeah, that's a good point. It starts tomorrow if you have to, if you can, instead of, well, we weren't there at the beginning. No, it doesn't matter. Get in now, which is great. Wonderful to hear that story. And we do have to talk more about OXO on other levels at some point. But first, your perspective on sustainability.
I think it's a really big topic, and it's a topic that permeates every decision that you make, especially in a design build situation. And to Karen's point, it has to be core to the brand. It has to feel organic. It has to feel authentic, which is a big world, and it has to be transparent. And so whether it's you're part of the circular economy or you're part of the sharing economy, or how are you reducing, how are you building in a way that's sustainable from end to end, it has to be organic to who you are. So with Sleep Number, you have to start somewhere. And so it's not going to get easier or go away. And so looking at it from an ESG perspective, both on the supply chain, from an energy perspective, from a building perspective, and then designing our spaces and experience as a foundational core and making decisions first about where are they being produced, how are they being used in the space, what is the end of life. Having a store is a very long life cycle. So you have to think about, what are you going to do with it at the end? How are you going to dismantle it? What are you going to do with it? So it's a long-term conversation, and it's a conversation that's going to just only intensify as regulations intensify and the need for transparency and reporting. And so I think if there is, I can't think of probably anybody that hasn't started on that journey, but it's something that has to happen now.
Apparently the planet's getting warmer. The word is out. Yeah. Back to Kitty.
Let's talk a little bit about sources of inspiration. So you both are doing a variety of projects. You're taking on new projects, new clients. So when you start something new, is there a specific source of inspiration that you like to go to, that you find yourself going back to? Where do you begin?
Well, I thought about this, and I think that my answer is probably the least sexiest at all from an inspiration perspective, and it's looking at a clarity framework for the strategy, being super clear about what are you trying to do for who, what is the outcome, what do you want to have to be different at the end, and creating that framework for what you want to do. And then the fun part from the inspiration comes in. And so for me, being able to travel and be a photographer is highly inspired by the visual world. And then being able to take some of that inspiration and work with some amazing people from a collaboration perspective, and just percolating more inspiration really starts to bring some new ideas to life, which is exciting, as well as a lot of things that people are doing in the show world from an event perspective. architecture. I mean, just being in this space is very inspiring. So thank you for that. And really being able to take it in from really every aspect that you can.
Karen, how about you?
Yeah, I love this question. And I'm with Angela in that when you have a process and a framework, not so rigid that you can't breathe, but that gives you the freedom to seek inspiration, and that gives you the discipline to have ideas come from so many places and then be placed in a certain paradigm. Um, it's interesting. I always think, like, when I was, as a consultant and in-house, I always think I have a touch of Stockholm syndrome whenever I begin something, because I just completely fall in love with my captor, and I'm determined to find something interesting in everything that I have to do, and want to do. So that's part of it. But I think that, like, be it in-house or consulting, I think conversations and effective listening and thoughtful, like, a sense of curiosity and thoughtful conversation goes a really long way. Be it with, the C-suite or department heads or individual practitioners, to cut across sample of, the constituents, that touch the brand and are involved with this particular challenge, is essential, because you never know where a great idea is going to come from. So I'd call that the looking within section of inspiration, which is to somehow channel, like, a true curiosity and just engage on both a professional and a human level with, like, a very fluid conversation. Have a guide, but always go off guide, because you never quite know what's going to spark. Looking without, personally, and just as a human being, I get nourished and nurtured by two very different things that are actually very similar things. So art and nature. And I've been a student of art history, like, since I was a kid, in various forms. And, living in New York, I have, so many museums, like, just steps away, and that's amazing. And nature does that for me as well. I left New York right after COVID hit. I went to Cape Cod for 2 years. I didn't plan on staying more than a few weeks, but I stayed for 2 years. And even though I was not near all of that art that's usually at my doorstep in the city, I actually found something very similar out in, low tide at sunset, where, like, the sights and the sounds, just fields of color, fill your peripheral vision. So I find that art and nature both serve as a reset and also just can spark ideas in really powerful ways. So every challenge is different, every opportunity is different, but those are my external resets and inspiration areas that never seem to fail me.
Okay, I think I'm stuck on Stockholm syndrome. We're gonna have to go back to that and talk about how that, I've some days I feel like I'm stuck in the Apple brand. Like Steve Jobs has trapped me forever, and I've fallen in love with my captor. So tell me your view on brands and brand strategy, and what is the purpose of a brand? And you can fold in Stockholm syndrome if you like. That'd be great.
Is that for me, Erin?
What is the purpose of a brand? What is
Yeah.
your view? What is the purpose of a
Yeah,
brand in our
absolutely.
lives? Why do they
So,
exist?
yeah, so it's interesting. I started my career the first few years in advertising, and it was the 90s, and it was a very different world for advertising. It was a very different world in general. And then I had a very serendipitous pivot to branding, and it involved, like, physically running into someone I used to know in a hallway and starting a conversation. So I'm a big serendipity person. So then I wound up at Landor for a couple of years, which I just loved, loved, loved. And I mentioned that because there were sort of early aughts video screens playing in reception that you'd pass a million times a day. And there were all these quotes from Walter Landor. And I mean, it's probably a form of, propaganda, but, like, the man had real insight. And in certain ways, he founded the branding industry. He was an industrial designer by trade. And there are two quotes that stuck with me from that video. That was probably like a 5-minute loop, not even. And I feel like those two quotes are the best way to answer your question, Erin. One is, products live on shelves, but brands live in the mind. And I always found that not only inspiring, but also a really concrete way to describe a concept that's quite esoteric. What is a brand? Like, is it a logo? Is it a campaign? Is it a product? Like, it is all of the above, no matter what. It's the sum total of all the experiences. But then once you aggregate that, what ladders up as far as the idea is concerned. So I love that brands live in the mind. And then the other Walter Landor quote that I think is a nice answer to your question is, and I give him full credit for this answer, is that a brand is a promise. And that one like took me like probably about 3 dozen back and forths in the hallway through reception to really wrap my head around. And I find with every passing year that that quote means more to me. And especially in this very kind of like fragmented, decentralized, DTC, Instagram's trying to get you to buy Prose shampoo, like, these things that hit you over and over and over again. They don't come from all the trusted sources that, used to be very centralized. And so the promises brands make, and I actually think we're going to hit a realm with safety, sort of the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy becoming a question mark again, because things are so deregulated and decentralized these days, where a brand is a promise of an experience of safety and health, of a series of benefits, definitely rational, that hopefully ladder up to emotional. It is also a promise of a certain set of values that are ever more important, including on the sustainability front, as we just discussed. So my answer to what is a brand, it is usually all of the above. Whenever people ideate anything that a brand brings to the world, but I love products live on shelves, brands live in the mind, and I love a brand as a promise.
That's a great answer. That's going to be tough to top. That was really good, wasn't it?
Next question. Karen, that was just too good an answer. So
Yeah, we'll just
Oh
make
no,
it.
the words were not even mine. Walter Landor founded his company on a boat in San Francisco. That is the man who deserves all the credit.
That's great. That's great. It's a great one. Well, we can talk about another topic. We can go to pets. We can always go to pets. Who has got pets as our backup, right? You want to tell me about your current pet business?
yeah, and so it was ironic that we both kind of ended up and are working with both pet companies from a consulting perspective. But during COVID, I started my own little mini startup with two of my partners, and it's all about creating wellness products for dogs. And so during COVID, myself had two very chronically ill pets. My partner had a chronically ill dog with cancer. My sister's dog was tremendously afraid of fireworks, thunder, pretty much anything. And so we got together, and one of my friends has 45 years experience in pet and is a canine herbalist, and was making products for us on how to help our dogs during COVID when it was really difficult to get vet care. And so we thought, well, there's other dog moms and dads out there that could really use assistance. And so we've created really products that are all natural. They're not CBD. They're products that can be used as kind of everyday help for pain relief, skin relief, calming, ear and eye care. And so really kind of evolved this into we are have e-commerce business and marketplace, have some wholesale, and being someone that's consulted startups on all of these things, I thought I should be a startup and really be able to relate to a lot of the issues. And so it's been an interesting journey for the last 3 years, and we're still so, really when you ask anyone about their pet, their face lights up, they're excited. They'd rather talk about their pet than pretty much anyone else in their life. And so the pet biz is changed. Your pets, your dogs, especially for us, are your children. You treat them like you would a family member. Their wellness is important. You're looking for smart solutions to help care for them. Karen can relate in the grooming part of the biz and the blowout. But it's evolving. It's very ripe for disruption. And so we're working in different ways to start that.
Yeah, I love that. Good to be consulting and then take the other side of the table. That's great. I have to tell my pet story because it's my mom's. So I have a sister, so we have two kids, right? My mom had 3 photos on the wall, and at one point we noticed that one of the photos was substantially larger than the other 2, and it was the dog. And it was in the center between her 2 kids too, so it had more prominence. I mean, it was large, and we both noticed it at the same time, my sister and I. We looked at it, Mom, The dog's photo is bigger, and the dog was a Chihuahua. So, I mean, she had to blow that thing up. The photo was bigger than the dog itself in real form.
Yeah, we had a very similar, there wasn't one picture of the family, but the 4 dogs, big 11 by 14 photos as soon as you walk in the door. So you know who's the number one in our family. And so like I said, our company we started is called Green Dog Botanics. And so really focusing around the 3 big trends of pet wellness and then natural products and sustainability. And so it's an exciting place to be in our journey.
So I think you two should get together on this because
Definitely, yeah.
the dogs can take the supplement before they go to the dry bar, and it's a
little calming,
completely
yep, definitely need a little
relaxing
of that.
and love it. Okay. I would like to hear a little bit more about your work with the OXO brand. So who in the room is familiar with the OXO brand? You recognize that? Oh, yes. Okay, so many, of course. So we're fascinated by the fact that this is a line of everyday items in our kitchen. And yet the people who love the OXO brand love the brand. They will buy nothing else. Can you talk a little bit about that, Karen? How do you create a brand with that much passion amongst its consumers?
Yeah, so I just wanted as a disclaimer, I want to say the brand was 25 years old when I started, 30 when I left. So it had a lot of love. And I saw my job when I got there because they had never quite articulated what they stood for. So in addition to running marketing, design, et cetera, globally, brand and marketing design globally, I was like, okay, I'm the only brand strategist here. Like my job one was to really define it. And, sometimes you're creating something from scratch. Sometimes you're evolving a brand, transforming a brand. In this case, I would call it brand strategy crystallization, which is, I think, the toughest because you've got to get it right. There's no mandate for change. There's a mandate for capturing what makes the brand special with an eye to the future, of course. And so similar to, our earlier conversation, it just started with a lot of respect, curiosity, and effective listening. And I can't go into too much detail around the solution, but I will say that there was a lot of love for OXO. I think for OXO, it is born, if we say there that OXO was born of love. So the founder's story, actually, which is widely publicized, it was a housewares executive retiree and his architect wife were living in the South of France, and apple tart was being made. So the architect was peeling with one of those unbranded metal peelers that are so ubiquitous, and was struggling with mild arthritis. And so the gentleman who was the housewares executive took modeling clay and put it around the handle, and it became the basis for the OXO brand. And so the idea is, when you help audiences that need more help, you not only enfranchise that part of the population. In the case of OXO, it also created a product that was better for the entire population. So we talk a lot about a bell curve, and most brands design for the top of the bell curve. You can't blame them. You want to sell to the greatest number of people with the greatest common need. But where OXO really blew everyone's mind, and the reason why it's a Harvard Business School case study, and it's in the collection of the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt and MoMA, its peeler, its original product, is because it broke the curve by taking inspiration from the part of the curve, the part of the population that needed more help. So I'm telling you that story, which some people know, and I'd say most people don't, it was founded with a sense of love in trying to help someone who needed help. And then there was the happy accident of it actually making life easier for everyone. So not only do the products that have handles have those handles, there's a mandate for every product at minimum to feel great in your hand and to make repetitive tasks that much easier and less labor intensive. But it also is a mandate to see around corners and to anticipate needs, many of which we don't even realize are problems until a brand like OXO solves them. And my favorite example, so my favorite OXO product, so the typical measuring cup, you need to be precise when you measure ingredients, especially for baking. And so the typical measuring cup, you kind of have to do this. You pour water, you put flour, whatever it is, you're doing this. And you're turning yourself into like a human yo-yo. But OXO found a way to, literally fold in the substrate, fold in the material of the measuring cup. So there's actually a ramp on the interior of the measuring cup with the measurement tickings on the top of that fold. So you literally and figuratively keep your integrity and your posture while you're using it. And it's not like people were lining up around the corner saying, gosh, my measuring cup's broken, I have to bob my head up and down. It was just sort of what humans do. We compensate for things that are sort of in need of a little extra effort. But when OXO solved that, people who got it were like, whoa, like that's when you start to fall in love. So there's things that feel good in your hand, things that solve problems in ways where needs are anticipated that you didn't even realize was a problem until they solved it. So that's where the love comes from. And I have a prediction, everyone in the audience, guess how many OXO products you have in your house, and then go home after this and count, and I bet you have 50% more than you think you have. That is a highly unscientific prediction, but that is what I've found to be the case. So a lot of love for the OXO brand, and it was from its founding to its ongoing curiosity of its team members to its high bar for innovation and design and delivery, and how long it lasts as well. So yes, a lot of love for OXO.
I have that measuring cup, and I think my statement was, I'm like, oh, fuck. Because you're like, that is freaking brilliant, right? When you're like, someone solved that problem that I didn't know I had. It's just brilliant.
It's the way they should have been designed in the first place, right? It's just like with mattresses. Of course, we needed mattresses that could be
Adjust to
firmer,
you.
or that could be adjusted, right? Of course, we need to have a different adjustment from the person that we're sleeping next to. So these are beautiful examples of smart design, beautiful examples of true design thinking, and beautiful examples of designing something that people, the consumers, didn't know they needed until they had it in their hands and could use it. And now they can never go back. Yeah. By the way, I'm a 95. I can't believe you're a 30.
You're like a really firm bet. Thank you.
It feels like there could be judgment in the numbers. I feel like
No
Really?
judging.
no judging the numbers? No, okay.
No judgment.
I don't know what my number is, honestly. I should know that.
Yes. Can I ask a Taylor Swift question? Oh,
Oh no, that was an accident. Yes, of course. And my work with her was very focused. I'm happy to tell you what the purview was, but I'm also a fan. So anything I can answer,
Okay.
I will.
well, I'm fascinated by people as brands. Do you remember when we met Martha Stewart? Okay, so, and actually that memory popped up on Facebook just this week. It was 10 years ago or something. She's the first person that I think we've had this conversation around, that she actually said there is no difference between Martha Stewart, the company, Martha Stewart, the brand, and Martha Stewart, the person. That's a big statement, and not necessarily a great thing, because she actually said, when I pass on, what will happen to the brand, what will happen to product line. So I'm fascinated by the work that you did with Taylor Swift. If you can talk a little bit about that. I know we're sensitive to asking you questions about the brands that you've worked with before, but is there anything there that you think our audience would be interested in hearing?
Yeah, sure. So the project was focused, but it actually wound up having a broader purview to get to the focused solution. So it was working with her through a beauty company on a fragrance, and she had several successful fragrances out, and this was sort of a new chapter. I believe it was right when her album, I think it was the album 1989 came out. It was less than a decade ago, but not much less than a decade ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And in order to create her latest fragrance, I decided process-wise that, we really had to take a step back and articulate what her brand was about. So I won't go into too much detail, and I have no evidence that like she's using this frame, this articulation loud or proud today. It was more like a stepping stone for us, but it was just really, it was like an exercise in pillars, and like articulating all of the aspects of what makes her special. So it was like the storytelling aspect. She's a master storyteller and minds personal things in a way that's really relatable, because she's this like elegant, lovely, accomplished woman, but she's really like going deep and sharing her insecurities and whatnot. So there's the storytelling aspect, the artist aspect, and then the romantic aspect. And she was really like, this is more my commentary than it is about the specific project, but my point of view is that she was getting labeled at the time as like a little boy crazy, and all the boyfriends was like the Harry Styles moment, and it was like, it's not boy crazy, it's someone who loves love, and that is like very beautiful because that comes from within. And then when you cross paths with someone who feels worthwhile for a few months or a few years or for the rest of your life, like that becomes your love story. And if you love love, it's just a different approach to how you view the world. And so it was a really fun explore of those sorts of aspects of who she is. But again, I'm not giving away state secrets as much as just plumbing the depths of what makes that brand tick. But it's a really good point, Kitty. Like, where does the brand begin and the person end? And I think, we don't want anyone to ever like lose their soul to their business. But I think that the really successful brands that are, humans as well, there isn't much separation as far as it's like genuine, like radiating from their soul. I worked with Wolfgang Puck as well, you mentioned earlier, and these are just, I can't tell you enough how lovely these humans were to work with, like to share ideas with and engage in a dialogue, and just so gracious. It's like in the startup world, you work with a lot of founders, and that's great too. But it's like these people sitting at the top of empires with their names on them were actually like more easygoing than some startups that don't exist yet. So that's an interesting sidebar. But yeah, no, I mean, she's a formidable force, and I think the most interesting brands know who they are and stay true to that core, and yet evolve over time as well, as she has continued to do as she's grown up. I mean, in her most recent album, she talks about her struggle with depression in one of the songs and her insecurities. If I could like digress for 10 seconds about Madonna, and I know this is like probably a really interesting topic for another time, it's terrible that everyone piled on with comments about her appearance, albeit jarring. But I have a Madonna theory, which is it isn't even the shock value of the plastic surgery and the way she looks now, as much as it's a deviation from the core of who she was as a brand. So she was always like fierce and fearless and unapologetic and embracing her physicality and her sexuality and like the space in her teeth, and like like she was just embracing her looks. And this is totally my editorializing, but I feel like the way she's presenting now seems to be coming from more of a place of fear and conformity, and like a please accept me at this stage in my life, as opposed to like, God, how much bolder is it to hear like Justine Bateman being like, I love my wrinkles, it's my wisdom, I think I look rad, was her like exact line. And I just kind of wish Madonna said that, because I think that would be more true to what her brand was all about. So it's just interesting to see individuals radiate their true selves. And if someone's feeling insecure, maybe that's the way to go at a certain point in your life. But at the same time, I think that plowing forward with courage is always essential in every situation, particularly with brands and people's names attached to them. So I'm not sure I answered your question at all, Kitty, but that was my diatribe about all things
Thank you.
pop culture, which is not usually my area of expertise, pop culture.
Yeah, I have to agree. The Madonna redesign didn't go over well. I don't think that was a good rebrand. I just don't know that it went in the right place. Though during that whole Taylor Swift thing, I kept thinking about, wonder what her sleep number is. And then it felt very inappropriate to even think the thought. So that leads me to the next question, which is, it's a very personal thing to talk about your sleep number and that experience. Can you go back in the sleep number story? Because I would like to know more about that, so I can talk about that in other places. I'm so curious about how they got to that, how you got people to lay down in a bed and talk about their number and everything else.
Yeah, it's a very personal conversation. And sometimes you forget that you're asking about, well, how do you sleep? And do you sleep with someone? And where do you sleep? And it's very personal. And so it's really, when you talk about a brand and an experience, it's designing a space and experience so that makes it really comfortable for someone to have that conversation. And so when you think about it from a store perspective, it's laying out the store so that the every aspect of the store makes it more comfortable for a person to have that conversation, because every single person in this room sleeps, but you don't all sleep the same. And so how do you create an individualized shopping experience that helps a customer get to the right product? And so from a Sleep Number perspective, it's designing the store. So, okay, you come in a store, who likes to lay down in a bed and have someone look at them? Okay, well, pretty much nobody. So when we started, people you'd have your bed in the windows because you think, oh, that's a great merchandising and everyone wants to see the bed, but nobody wants to lay down on the bed in the window. Who wants to be the window display? So it's taking some of those insights and creating a store design that you start in the back of the store. It's a relationship-based process. And so you're building confidence and you're building that relationship with the person that you're talking to. And so a traditional mattress store, sea of white beds, most likely a male hovering over you while you're on a bed, super uncomfortable. So using that relationship and having that person get to be more comfortable, and through that, using both the physical space, when we're talking about a consistency of a brand perspective, to help the consumer on that journey. And so adding in technology that helps the consumer understand, well, really, what does this bed do? How does it conform to my body? And making it easier for to understand, okay, well, I see that when I lay down on the bed, my pressure points go away. This is how the thing works. Building credibility and confidence in the product, building credibility in the person. You're building that relationship. So it's a combination of the human experience, the physical, and the digital experience, which each one having a really specific purpose. The human is the curator and building that experience and helping you feel comfortable. The physical space, kind of brings the brand to life. It gives you that communication where and how you need it. And then the digital is creating experiences to help you understand the benefits of the product. So when you say, well, what does it do and why do I need it? And why do I need something that's going to give me data and tell me the next day how I slept? And so it adds value to the experience, and those meaningful benefits add value to well, why do I need to buy it? So it all comes then into the helping the team with building consideration and then ultimately conversion. And so that's the Sleep Number from the experience perspective. And then from the product perspective, it really has been an evolution to get to the place where it really is the center of your health and wellness, and being able to who in the room sleeps great? Okay, I see like 5 hands. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. So it's a problem that most people have. And so being able to have a product that can solve, pain issues, temperature issues, you both sleep different, you want to still sleep in the same room. And so from that perspective, being able to individualize the product experience, the retail experience, and the communication is, I think, very unique.
That was great. That was plenty of fuel for my sleep conversations. I use a sleep app, and I'm amazed by the things that are advancing in sleep, and its connection to health and wellness is profound.
Yeah, you don't need the app. So I'll do my selling. So with a Sleep Number bed, you lay down on your bed. It tracks your respiration, heart rate, and movement all night long.
Wow.
You don't wear anything. You don't do anything. It's effortless. And then the next morning, you get your Sleep IQ score. It tells you how you slept. When you're awake, shows you your circadian rhythms.
Yeah.
Gives you tips on what you can do differently to sleep better. So
Yeah.
it's one of the only products that senses you and your individuality and then helps you do something to change that behavior without having a band on your head or your wrist or
Right.
something
All
like
those
that.
lovely things that
Yeah.
you're sleeping
So
with.
it's a unique product.
That's cool. We have not gone to the audience for questions, and time has freaking flown by. Does anyone in the audience have a question for our guests? Kitty, you gonna do the runaround?
I'll run the mic, yes.
Thank you. Hi, Kristen Moran. Thank you so much for an enjoyable, clever conversation. I was thinking about as brands grow up and they start as young whippersnapper disruptors and they grow into big, heavy, valuable brands, there's a lot of fear amongst people that work in those brands. Fear that anything you might do that's different will devalue or risk the brand. And I would love to hear both of your thoughts about handling that inherent fear, which is real, it's money, right? It's a real risk, and how you encourage these big brands to evolve and where the fluidity is in the brand.
Who wants to take that sticky wicket?
Well, I can start. And I think that the one place is to start with the customer. It's always about the consumer. And so where's the consumer going and how do you meet? Sometimes you have to meet the brand to the consumer. Sometimes you have the brand that's ahead of the consumer and you're bringing them along. And so there is risk and change, but there's always, you can do it in a way that you have small bets and you can have big wins. And so where do you try, where do you learn, and then where do you expand? And then you also have to have a culture that is open to innovation and change. And that's part of the DNA of an organization, is that willingness to step outside the box of where you are, because it's very comfortable and sometimes very profitable. But then you're not disrupting into the next thing, back to the earlier part of the conversation. And so sometimes it's very hard, you know, me being a part of a brand that had 3 pretty major transformations. One of them was because we had to. It was either transform or be gone. And so it has to be both part of the DNA. It has to be part of that disruptive mentality and really game changer. And then you have to be able to take those consumer insights. What can you test and learn? And then continue to go bigger. Karen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love this question. And there's definitely not like a uniform answer to it. I'd say that for a brand that changed the game when it came to market or has done interesting things along the way, I'd say safe is risky, which isn't to say you become like a daredevil, mavericky kind of brand for the rest of your life. But you know, I worked for I won't name names, but I worked for like a very famous global specialty retail fashion brand, and they weren't doing well at the moment. And someone actually said, well, this handbag did really well 10 years ago. It was our best seller that year. Let's issue that same handbag. And I was like, oh my God, like it was such a, I mean, they were serious, but it was kind of an amazing moment because it's like, especially in the world of fashion, reissuing something, and it wasn't being done in like a, you know, classic reissue vintage kind of way. It was like, well, that worked, so let's do the exact same thing again. They didn't do it, but that's an extreme example of trying to be safe and taking, I would think that would be the most dangerous thing you could do. So I think that you know, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, like throw caution to the wind forever, like, you know, because you have an infrastructure you need to support, you have salaries you need to support, you have, you know, sometimes like if you're a wholesale brand, you've got retailers not to disappoint. If you're, you know, whatever, there's lots of people's lives depending on what you're doing. So you don't always throw caution to the wind. But I think the best way to do it is portion off a percentage of innovation, of sales efforts, of marketing efforts to do something daring. If that's right for your brand, if that's true to your brand. And if you do that, everything will benefit. It will probably illuminate ways to do the less risky core even better. And it'll certainly be the only way to shed light on new opportunities. So I think that you could kind of hedge by shoring up the safety and then making room for the experimentation and the risk. But as you do this, the key is to be true to your core, and also to harken back to the earlier conversation, especially for a disruptor brand, to get to a point where you're so big that you rest on your laurels. That to me is the riskiest thing you could do, because that's not why people fell in love with you in the first place. And it's important to have that love sustained and to constantly bring in new audiences who love you just as much. But great question.
Yeah. No resting on laurels. That's not good. Chairs maybe, but not laurels. One more question. Do we have another question before we finish our yes?
Tell me briefly how the path to purchase has changed in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, particularly at Select Comfort.
Did you say pet purchase or?
Path to purchase.
Path. Okay, I thought you said pet. So I'm like, okay, like we talk about that too. What's interesting is the path to purchase, I think, is changing in retail in general, is that it's very nonlinear. And so traditionally in the mattress and bed and now sleep, it would be a physical purchase because it's a physical product. But now it's a research, it's connected from a digital physical perspective. You can purchase it anywhere. And as it becomes even more nonlinear, to be able to purchase from a media perspective or on social, but being able to have the intersection, the cohesiveness of, okay, I'm going to maybe learn about it here, but I'm going to go in store to try it. And really understanding the purpose of the store. So that's the store is all about building a relationship. It's about trial and experience and giving them a reason to come to the store. So the mattress industry has changed a ton from the sea of mattresses and the mattress man to be able to have either this experiential, which is where Sleep Number was going, or that kind of fast fashion with the bed in the box and pop out of the box. And so it's become very bifurcated with commodity and price. And then those that are doing actually something that has meaningful benefits in the product and experience. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that continues in both different directions.
Karen, do you have a perspective on that? That's a big, meaty question.
I mean, I like the question. I definitely cannot answer the specific nature of that question. That is all Angela's territory. But I was thinking like just how has path to purchase changed in general? And obviously every category is different, but I feel like the rise of DTC brands and, obviously social media is not going anywhere, even though it's sort of simultaneously imploding around us. But, the rise of the invasive nature and personal nature of very targeted DTC brands, as well as like credibility from so many different sources, like the one-way communication has been dead for a really long time. But think of all the various ways that you can now find credibility, for lack of a better word, from other sources, and consumers are so smart, these are going to dry up as well. So I feel like I always think history will not look kindly on influencers. That is my big prediction. I don't think they'll go away entirely. I think they'll change form, but I just think like that's a moment. And then when people realize how sponsored they are, and consumers are smart enough to realize that already, that diminishes their credibility. So be it influencers of the moment, ambassadors, which I think is, adjacent, but speaks to a different level of love as opposed to just, transactional payment, be it the more transparent affiliate, links, brand experiences out there in the world, values-based connections, or even like my secret favorite, that like trickle down of the top funnel of brand communication that says who you are and eventually builds relationships over time. I feel like the path to purchase is so rich and complex. It's no longer just a funnel. It's like a really complicated multi-matrix chart in a good way, because it's not supposed to be linear. We don't live life in a linear fashion. So I feel like it's getting more interesting and a little scary, but more interesting by the day.
That's great. Yeah, the funnel does it a disservice for sure. It isn't a good metaphor anymore. That was a great question and a good one to finish on as we are ending another wonderful event together. Thank you for doing this, both of you, Karen and Angela, for hanging out with us, answering some great questions.
Thank you.
And all of you showing up and participating in this. We have two great ones, and of course my co-host. I cannot forget my co-host, Kitty. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have two wonderful lineups coming. We have Gavin Kaysen and the Cooks of Crocus Hill team announcing a wonderful thing next month. And the month after that, we have Paco Underhill paired up with James Damien. You might know James Damien. He's been here before. He's noteworthy. And Paco Underhill, if you haven't read Why We Buy, you shouldn't be able to buy anything, honestly. It's an amazing book. So we have those two paired up for June, and we're trying to figure out the next quarter. So thank you all for doing this and hanging out with us. Great conversation. And
Thank you to everyone tuning in online today as well. Thank you. Karen, we'll say goodbye to you. I think you're going to stick around for a little bit, right? So we can visit. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.